I think we're going to get started. This is our final presentation for the day here at the Norman Williams Public Library. Thank you everybody for being here. So I just have a few housekeeping things, and then I will introduce Chris, and then he will give his presentation. So you may have already heard this, but Bookstock is supported by some organizations whose generosity has made it possible for this wonderful event to be free to the public. So I want to recognize them now. They are the Jack and Dorothy Byrne Foundation, the Pauline Davenport Children's Fund of the Vermont Community Foundation, the Vermont Humanities Council, and the Woodstock Learning Lab. I also want to give a special shout out to our media sponsor, the Vermont Standard, also WCTV8 Woodstock Community Television for taping all of our author sessions, as well as the Yankee Bookshop, which is Vermont's oldest independent bookshop. I don't know if you knew that, but it's pretty awesome. And of course, Sustainable Woodstock. Bookstock also operates on grants, local generosity, and donations. So if you feel so inclined, you can donate by credit card online or drop something in the donation buckets on the green. That would be greatly appreciated. So, for the reason that we're here this afternoon, Chris Dant is a writer who lives in southern Vermont with his wife Maureen and golden retriever Chauncey. They are both here today. Hi Chauncey, hi Maureen. Chris is a graduate of Indiana University in the Sciences and English and has spent his career as a writer chiefly in nonfiction. But in 2000, he attended Stanford University's creative writing program and began writing fiction. Soon after that, he wrote a book of short stories entitled Appalachian Waltz. In 2008, he moved his family to Vermont to assume a faculty position at Dartmouth College, where he taught writing. Rescue is his first novel. Set in Vermont, Rescue is a remarkable story of a war veteran, Captain Dirk Hansen, who lives in his confined world of PTSD, until an extraordinary and talented service dog, Chauncey, transforms his heart and soul. The two become bound together by unwavering trust and a recaptured lightness of life, until one day, Chauncey inexplicably vanishes. This forges a 2-year, 1,000-mile harrowing odyssey that both man and dog must endure. But hope grows from despair in this gripping but charming story of a man and his beloved dog. Rescue illustrates the resiliency and imagination of dogs, the remarkable bond that they have with the disabled, and ultimately the greatness that all dogs bring to our lives. Since publication in 2018, Rescue has received many outstanding reviews and was featured on several national, overseas radio interviews and podcast tours. The novel was described by New York literary agency Finn Partners as beautifully atmospheric, elegantly written, at once both painful and hopeful, an edge-of-your-seat page-turner. Please, let's all welcome Christopher.
Okay, I wanted to make sure everybody can hear me. Thank you, Allison, and thanks to Bookstock. I'm very honored to be part of this great literary and coveted organization and this beautiful library that I've actually never been in, but I'm happy to give a talk here for the first time. So now you know a little bit about what this novel is about, but let me tell you some of my thoughts behind it and why I think it's such a remarkable story. It is fiction, but it has some elements of real life in it that I think was very important to tell. To start, I just wanted to tell you about something remarkable that happened recently. Scientists came across in what is now near Bonn, Germany, a gravesite that they found and it was from the Paleolithic era, some 15 to 20,000 years ago. And in it was a puppy that was buried inexplicably next to a young man and a woman. But it was buried ceremoniously. It had artifacts and trinkets, and it was purposely placed around the dog as an homage to the dog. They discovered that the puppy had been sick with bouts of canine distemper, and the man and the woman had carefully cared for the dog, keeping it warm, feeding it, making sure it was okay. But they were obviously driven by compassion and an emotional bond with the young dog. Perhaps they found the dog protective. Perhaps it also kept the parents of the young puppy. But there was something really remarkable there, an emotional bond, for sure, and that long ago. It seems like ever since wolves became dogs, we've been suffering from a case of puppy love. And it's that bond, that remarkable relationship between us humans and us dogs. It's, I find, very difficult, sometimes impossible to really characterize in words and images, yet there have been hundreds of books written by great authors that attempt to show the greatness and value that our wonderful dogs bring to us. Books like, well, recently all of Bruce Cameron's books that have been made into movies, or at least two of them have, A Dog's Purpose, but all the great books, Lassie Come Home, The Remarkable Journey, and the great book of Marley and Me. So it's that unwavering and true bond that is, to me, really remarkable. But in writing, the hand grows shaky here because the relationship between man and his dog is ultimately really a mystery. It's one that defies words and can only be expressed in certain experienced, be it on the hunting fields or on the battlefields or in service. The many ways that dogs help men and women really, truly amaze me. And it's particularly those people who suffer from emotional and physical bonds, and particularly PTSD, seen in many people, and particularly our soldiers of war, 30% of whom come back with PTSD, and many commit suicide. It's really a horrible reality that leads to, horrible life. And fortunately, a solution comes in the form of 4 paws, a wet nose, and a desire to please. So for me, the most profound bond is that beautiful relationship between a disabled or psychologically damaged person and a service dog. This novel that I wrote is fiction, obviously, but it's based on real people with real disabilities in real life situations who find salvation in their dogs. So let me introduce you to a few of these people, some of whom I know, and their dogs. Here is Joe Aguirre. He's an Army veteran and his golden retriever service dog named Munger. And these are quotes from the veteran. I was startled awake and wrapped my arms around her. As she was soothing weight settled me. She gently licked my cheeks and I whispered to her, "Thanks for being there." The nightmare was gone and we settled back down to sleep. Here's Jason Hag and his German Shepherd service dog Axel. If it wasn't for Axel, I'd be 6 feet under now. I now live independently with him by my side. Here's Sean Brooks and his beautiful St. Bernard service dog Bella. I couldn't trust anybody. I didn't go into crowds. Now with Bella, I can go anywhere without anxiety. And here is Russ Stafford. He was one of the service people that I interviewed and who reviewed my book, my early draft of the book. And his golden retriever service dog Major. With Major, I don't focus on the pain within me. I focus on him. He's a godsend. And last, Here is Luis Carlos Montalvan and his golden retriever service dog named Tuesday. And he's the author of a New York Times bestseller called Until Tuesday. It was quite famous at the time. Tuesday is an emotionally intelligent dog. He's been able to rekindle my ambitions, my goals, my dreams, my wishes. That's to help other people. So I was moved particularly by this man, Luis Montalvan, and at the time he published the New York Times bestseller, I became friends with him and was inspired by his great work with Service Dog and his story about Tuesday and how it saved him. Sadly, Louis died a couple of years ago, and luckily his golden retriever Tuesday continued his journey and is in service. So in this novel, I tried to show that beautiful relationship that you see with these people. And it's the wonderful bond between a broken man and his loving dog, really tested through time and any adversity. That bond is unbreakable and unspoiled and revealed in many different ways. We see it in the heartbroken dog lying under the soldier's casket after his soldier passed away. The dog in the lap of a homeless man protecting him. And an old homeless dog taken in by the kindness of a stranger. So dogs are not just our buddies, our protectors, but they're ultimately our saviors. And that is the essence of what I tried to write about. So I'll read a little bit from the book and give you a sense of where we are. We open as we were dropped down into the mind of Dirk Hansen, the central character, a war veteran. In the dreadful silence of the foreign land, everything moved in a shadowy slow-motion hell. Down in a burned-out crater, Captain Dirk Hansen lay in icy numbness, staring into the black oblivion. Ghouls fed upon his limbs as he watched the stealthy approach of his death. A faint cry made him turn. It was Sergeant Darby, his wide and blinking eyes staring at him. The man's legs had been ripped away, and in an audible gasp, he begged for his commander to end his own misery. Other men tossed into the pit were whispering, holding out their red, slippery arms, praying in quiet, grotesque agonies. Then, within the awful stillness, there broke a tremendous clangor of battle, a furnace roar of deafening explosions, loud, ghastly screams from men and from children. A crimson roar hurled down, pinning Dirk Hansen under an unending tidal wave of terror. He squeezed rivers of mud through his twisted finger and as he lurched back, when death seized him as a ferocious vice. God, please make it stop. Stop. Please stop. He thrashed between darkness and blinding flashes, between living and dying. He couldn't breathe. His head, his limbs, his hands, his head were bound in a heaving tangle. His mortal fear was broadcast, spewing from him an acrid odor like foul cooking meat. Within the hopeless moments, the moments that he thought the horror would never end, down at the deepest level of his consciousness, Captain Hansen felt a gentle and perceptible warmth at him. A soft and steady breath pulsed at his face. It smelled of fish. He opened his eyes to the face of Chauncey, his golden retriever. She lay on his chest, moving his head about with a strong muzzle. His murderous mind was eclipsed, and once again he floated in that dizzy and delicious lightness of being he had come to know with his dog. He was back again with her, in his peaceful Vermont home. His heart continued to race. Chauncey stayed with him, her warm and watchful eyes, her steady at his. She licked his face. "It's okay," he whispered. "I can breathe now, girl." Chauncey felt his heartbeat drop, his breathing relax, and now his usual earthy smell had returned. Her job was finished, a job well done. Once again, she pulled her head back and panted, her black lips curling up to her ears. It was that perpetual smile he so loved. They lay in close together in silent communion. "You are my life, Chauncey." Her tail swished the bed covers. This dog had given back Dirk Hansen everything, everything he had lost in life. So, as we see from this nightmare, we go back and we learn that Dirk Hansen is a broken veteran with severe PTSD, near suicide, alone in the world, and having lost his wife, his devoted father, the fellowship of his service comrades, and now his own mind. He is at the end of his rope, depressed and suicidal. Dirk is visited by another vet in the story early on with his German Shepherd service dog named Tippy. The dog profoundly affects Dirk, and he sets out on a quest to find a service dog through Canines Assisting Soldiers, run by another veteran in the story, Drew Vaughn. And one of the service dogs he meets is Chauncey, a young golden retriever that had also experienced profound loss with her first handler, Jerry Burson, in a Pups for Prisoners program in an Alabama prison, and found it difficult to connect with another human being until he meets Dirk. So the bond that they eventually forge grows from great need and extraordinarily strong conviction of complete trust from both man and dog. It's a really remarkable thing when that happens. Hansen then brings his dog home to his home in Vermont for the first time. It was after midnight when he led her to her crate next to his bed, but when he opened the door, she hesitated and looked back up at him. He knew what she wanted. It wasn't something Drew had recommended, but it was just for the night. He raised his arm, and she leapt onto his bed, and in the silence of the dark room, Dirk lay with his arm around his dog, feeling her steady breath and her strong young heart. This night, the horror of the battlefield, that unending war of his mind, was far away, replaced by something more powerful. This night, there was peace. Even at the early days of the homestead, Chauncey stayed close to Dirk. She would lie by the hour at his feet, eager and alert, watching his face, dwelling upon it, studying it, memorizing his many expressions. She keenly followed each fleeting expression, every nuance of his features, his movements, his sounds, his different smells. Or she might lie further out, studying the man's outlines, contemplating his wide gestures. And when he walked into view, the strength of his gaze would draw her head around, and she would return it, her heart shining through her eyes. Yes, there was loyalty and love and an intense bond, but the relationship transcended any explanation. It wasn't just simply a sense of himself and a separate being, the dog. With her by his side, Dirk felt stronger, more powerful, self-assured. It made him think of men thousands of years ago, ancient men sitting around an open fire with their wild companions nearby, protecting them with some mystical, shamanistic quality. They were heroic, wise, healing in an otherwise brutal and unforgiving world. There was no alpha dog, no dominance or submission, only unspoken and unwavering companionship. And that's how it was for Dirk with Chauncey. He had lost everything that mattered in his life. His wife, his father, the fellowship of the men who protected him, any peace within his own mind. But with Chauncey, he had been given more than he ever could have imagined. Then, early in the story, on a beautiful Vermont autumn day in the Riverdale Recreation Park, his dog vanishes. It was 6 p.m. It was now 3 hours after he had arrived at the park with Chauncey. He must have run through the park a dozen times now. Some of the people who had helped Dirk were telling him how sorry they were that they couldn't find her and return to their cars. Even the old man and his dog, too, had given up and left. Another hour passed. Time slowed. Then, as darkness began to envelop the park, Dirk was alone. From the hills beyond, a huge sadness rolled down upon Dirk. He stood in the middle of the expansive field, looking at the lonely building where he had last heard his dog, trying to piece together some sense of the last long hours, but his world had turned surreal, immobilizing, another anguished battle raging inside him, rushing in like those familiar horrible fields of wars, those places from which he had been delivered by the only thing that mattered, his dog, his protector, who had given him unwavering trust, his companion, but brought him back from all that he had lost. And now, here in the middle of the Riverdale Recreation Park, a calamitous fear rose in him, broadcasting from him a pungent odor. And in the back of his mind, he thought maybe, just maybe, his acrid familiar smell would alert her, and she'd race back to him. And he knelt onto the grass, hoping to God that it would, but it didn't. She was gone. So, the majority of this book is really a story of how Dirk Hansen launches a frantic nationwide search for his companion. But it covers 2 years and hundreds of miles through city streets and the wilds of New England. Chauncey encounters wild animals, ends up far away in a city street comforting a desperate homeless man, and nearly loses her way back many times. She eventually comes face to face with insurmountable circumstances and very nefarious characters. During this incredible journey, Chauncey meets a young Labrador retriever named Callie, and together they ford the dangers. The odyssey reaches a dramatic end back where the story had begun, in Dirk Hansen's Vermont home, when he comes face to face with his dog's abductors and the 2 dogs themselves. So, as it said earlier, this story is about the imagination and resiliency of dogs, the remarkable bond and devotion they share with the disabled. And it's about love between a broken man and his dog, and ultimately the greatness that every dog brings to our life. The story started out as a short story about a dog who was stolen but never got published. It didn't feel it was compelling enough. But there's still a few things that strike a fear and heartache into our dog lovers and owners' mind than a lost dog. To be separated from our dog is supremely painful. And then I thought about a far more poignant tale, and I thought of Carlos Lewis, Captain Montalban, who I knew, about a service dog that gives him back life, and he relies on that dog to live. But then the dog vanishes. This story, I think, the journey that Chauncey takes reminded me a lot of what I read in The Incredible Journey. It was written in '61 by Sheila Burnford. If you haven't read that book, it's pretty remarkably written and very compelling, and of course Disney made movies out of it. And it was about 2 dogs and a cat wandering through the Canadian wilderness. This is a little bit more gripping, I think, because I tried, as one should in fiction, to make it as real as possible. And a lot of my readers said I almost could not read this because it was so gripping. The place is Vermont for the most part, and the dog is Chauncey, and she's right back there. And it's based on her, and the character Dirk Hansen was fashioned after some men and women. Well, there she is. Fashioned after some people that I knew in the service, and particularly Louis Montalban. And many of the characters in Rescue actually are from Vermont and based on lots of, hi girl. A lot of people that I encountered over the years in Vermont, and really wonderful, remarkable people that have such strength of character, and I tried to capture that, and also tried to, capture the place, Vermont. And it's really a remarkable place. I know, girl. The various twists and turns of the story, it took a couple of years to envision, and it turned out to be a thriller and a mystery rolled into one adventure, and really ultimately a love story that I wanted to tell. But it was very hard to write this because writing very realistic fiction and having the narrator get down and close into the dog required that I show rather than tell, which is the backbone of fiction, the reader how the dog was feeling and what was going on with the dog. I didn't want to pretend like Bruce Cameron does. I didn't want to have the dog talk to talk to the reader, because I don't like that. So it was very difficult for me to, without using frank adjectives, tell the reader what was going on with the dog. So I had to really think through that, and I had to look at her a lot. I think that's all I really want to say about the book. I'm certainly happy to entertain any questions you might have about the book, and I've got quite a few books here if you would like to buy one. It's only, less than a year old. It's gotten a lot of great reviews, and I'm hoping that it'll do well. Okay. Yeah?
Two things. Can you tell us a little more about yourself, where you taught before, et cetera?
Yeah.
And what happens, because you did research and everything, when one of these dogs dies? I mean, obviously most of the soldiers are going to outlive the dog.
Right.
How does that affect them and that kind of thing?
Yeah, Lewis's book actually addresses that, and unfortunately in that case, Lewis died before the dog. So, well, I as Allison briefly mentioned, I studied English and science actually at a couple of colleges, and in 2000 attended Stanford's creative writing program and learned the art of fiction. I mean, the art of creative writing, but I learned very quickly that all of those courses really did very little to get me to the point where I am today. So it took a great deal of writing. I taught writing at Dartmouth College, and I did a class in fiction over many years, and I also taught scientists how to write and clearly express themselves, so that was kind of the bulk of my pay. But, so the majority of, my experiences come from just writing over the many years. Does that answer your question?
Well, at Dartmouth, then you taught more scientific writing, that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
rather than creative writing, is what you're saying?
Right, I taught both. Yeah. And in terms of the dogs dying, yes. Well, when a service member gets a service animal, I learned this from, Paws for Purple Hearts endorsed my book, and they're a really great organization nationally that trains, they actually breed and train dogs. They have a puppy breeding program. So when the dog becomes too old, they don't wait for the dog to die, they usually replace it. And they usually take the older dog back to the place like Paws for Purple Hearts or Canines Assisting Soldiers or whatever there might be. There are hundreds of them, and care for them there. I mean, Tuesday was Lewis's dog and went back to its original owner and became an emotional care animal in hospitals. They have many. They're all trained to a very specific role. PTSD is one of them, somebody who's blind is another, somebody who's crippled and so forth. And they all have different training, but they do have cross skills, and so a lot of them go into other less demanding roles. But a lot of them are replaced with the soldier or the person who needs it. Yeah. That's the only question? Yes.
I have just a comment. Several years ago, I had put my mother in an assisted living, and it was a small facility, and they would invite people to bring their dogs in, and one in particular that I remember so well. My mother would literally look forward every morning, and the dog would go from room to room to room, and it was amazing the effect that it had on.
Huge effect. I mean, I didn't go into this, but I mean, there are so many people who are living with fear and isolation, particularly older people, in which a dog is remarkable for them. Remarkable. It's very difficult for some people to understand, well, why would a dog give somebody that? But there's something about it. It's pretty hard to be sad when you got a dog like that lying in your lap licking your face. And there's something that's almost indescribable and inexplainable. And they even bring horses into hospitals for some of the people I've seen some pictures of that, but animals in general. But dogs are, you know, remarkable in that way, as they basically, I mean, the PTSD service dog works by, you know, looking at the human, as I try to describe, the dog knew every ounce of that man, knew all of his expressions, his smells, his movements, and even an almost inexplicable or invisible tremor of the hand or the foot would alert them. And they just get right in your face and bring you right back from where they're going. So that's the idea, is they don't allow you to go away in your mind and become sad, or in the case of a PTSD suicidal. It's really, really remarkable how they can help people like that, and they're used in many different ways. Not only just, you know, people who are blind or disabled, but emotionally wrought. And I personally think that, you know, dogs can, you know, bring so many people brighter days that are struggling within their minds. I mean, every time I walk down the street with her and you see maybe an older person sort of bent over and maybe looking kind of sad, and they see that dog and their face brightens up. It's just something about it that just immediately gives them joy, immediately gives them something. And pretty hard to do that with a human. Dogs are really good at it. Yeah. Yeah.
How are they keeping up with the ratio of training dogs for these returning servicemen who need them? Do they have enough people who want to train the dogs?
You're talking about training organizations in general?
Right, for veterans too. Because
well, I don't know the statistics on it, but I know there are hundreds of, you know, veterans apply to get a service dog. I mean, these dogs, it takes them 2 years to get trained and many, many thousands of dollars. And of course, it's free to the veteran. And so there's a lot of donations and money that comes in that way. But in terms of keeping up with it, I don't know if it's lagging behind or not, but I don't think it is. I think there's a lot of dogs. There's a Bergen International University out in California that is run by Bonnie Bergen, who first actually coined the term service dog. And she is the head of PAWS for Purple Hearts. And she breeds puppies. So they have whole farms in which they train these dogs. It's a lot of work, but it's work that a lot of people do just out of the kindness of their hearts. They, you know, they don't get paid. And it's for a wonderful, you know. I mean, I didn't want to try and write this book about service dogs per se, or veterans or PTSD. It was more about going to the heart of a relationship between the two, in which I think this vehicle told that story. So I would say, yeah, I would say that I have not heard an instance in which there's just lots of need. I think there's a bit of a waiting list, and I don't know how, but I mean, it goes on need. A lot of these soldiers are desperate. I mean, they're just at the end of the rope. Yeah.
This goes to, I think, the answer you provided in the first question. If I followed you, you said that it's common that a service dog is removed from his or her human prior to the end of their natural life.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that you might get some pushback from soldiers or others who are involved with the dog. Plus, how is that done with the dog?
Well, I don't know exactly, but I mean, my understanding is that if the dog becomes old, I mean, it's not as if they lose interest. It's, I think, physically they just can't keep up with the demands that the soldier might need. And, you know, when a dog gets a lot older, it might not be able to jump up or get things. I don't think it loses interest. I just think it just gets old enough to, you have to take them out of service. And I know there'd be a lot of pushback. Now, I don't know whether I know that in Iraq and Afghanistan, and there's been books written about this, where soldiers had service dogs and the Army wouldn't have let them to go home with Iraq once they were discharged. But there have been instances in which that has happened and they've been allowed to. But in terms of pushback from I would, you know, think a veteran would say, oh, no, you can't take my dog away. I don't really know. I just know that most of the time the dogs don't outlive the humans. So I think there is just simply a need there, and it may be that they can keep them somehow but still have another dog. Yeah.
I think they sign a contract and it's explained to them, their counsel.
Yeah, it isn't something that I found out a lot about. I talked to several dog training organizations to do research for the book, how they train the dogs, what goes into it, what is needed, and then I also talked to soldiers who got dogs and what that was like and how it changed them. So, but those are great questions. I mean, you know, I didn't want to broach that in the book because it isn't appropriate, but yeah, I mean, Lewis wrote actually several books, followed his book Until Tuesday about his dog getting older. And I don't know, Tuesday is something like 12 or 13 now. When he had him, he was only like 6 or 5. And in the book, Chauncey's only 4. So, you know, there can be sequels. I don't know about what yet. Yeah.
Where are your books?
I'm sorry?
Where are the books for sale?
Downstairs. And by the way, that's Chauncey. I was walking, this is in the back of the old house that we had in, where I lived near Hanover, Dartmouth, and I just saw her. She sat down in the snow. It was snowing. It was in the middle of February. It was very cold, and she was looking at the house because there was another dog there that she loved. So I walked behind her, and I thought how beautiful that was with the snow falling on her. So I took the picture, and I just totally forgot it until 2 years ago when I was looking for a cover. You know, the agent said, well, we've got great ideas. I said, no, I got the cover, no problem. And that's the cover. I mean, it just shows that longing, that yearning, you know, that is described in the book to try and find Dirk. And she eventually does find Dirk. I don't like to give it away, but, you know, I can never hurt a dog in a book, you know. Yeah. She's 9 now. She's about 4 or 5 there. Yeah. The dog in the book is 4. Well, she's a puppy when she gets into the Pups for Prisoners program, which is a made-up name, but a lot of those service dogs go into prisons to help prisoners, and it's really, you know, you talk about dogs comforting people. It's remarkable in prisons. I mean, these people are hopeless. They don't have anywhere to go. They have no future, and these dogs give them hope. So that's how I described it, because she gave this prisoner, Jerry Burson, great hope. And then she's taken away to resume her training, and the dog just, you know, is devastated because that's her first love. All of the trainers are short-term before that. So she has a very hard time connecting, but when she does, the bond is extremely remarkable. All right. Thank you very much.